As soon as he hits resume here, we're good. We're recording now. Okay, so we're taping this just so he can show his B-Day classes, and I can show the rest of my classes today and tomorrow. So we're going to record all of this. I'm going to sort of set it up here, and then Mr. Klein is going to play the role of the teacher. I'm going to play the role of the student. We get a sense of how we set it up, and we'll kind of go for 7, 8 minutes, whatever it is, and then we can ask questions. Okay, like you all will ask questions if you have questions.
So this is functioning as like the round one. Like after you guys have researched your initial problem, this will be like the first time you come up and like present and kind of explain it. Cool.
All right. So my problem, I'm going to read the problem so that Mr. Klein knows. It is a West African country. Due to a large number of insects that are resistant to pesticides, new and dangerous diseases are springing up throughout your country as well as surrounding countries. These countries are seeing different variants. That is our problem. Okay. So I am dealing with pesticide-resistant mosquitoes in my country. My country is incredibly diverse. We have 370 ethnic groups in our country. There's a split between Islam, Christianity, and tribal religions. We are primarily an oil-producing country, though agriculture makes up about 24% of our GDP. And that's important because agriculture is what we're going to focus on here with these bugs that are pesticide resistant. The key that I'm focusing in here is pesticides. You use pesticides obviously with plants and agriculture. So we're drilling down on this part of our GDP, which is 24% of our GDP is agriculture and plants. So we're drilling down on that. That's a substantial part of our GDP. Some other things to know about my country, even though it is a democracy, it is corrupt. The bureaucracy is highly corrupt at every level. The highest level, I mean, we've had examples of senators in our legislative branch use taxpayer money and oil money to buy themselves SUVs, like personally just buy BMW SUVs. We've had a lot of corruption in our government, all the way down to local law enforcement. So we have this corruption. We have a general distrust of our government in our society. We have laws against the queer community. So we have all of this going on, but really what I'm wanting to focus on is the agricultural, trying to address the problem with the pesticides. And I'm even going to try to address the problem of corruption through my solution. And so my solution is this. I see an opportunity to address these pesticide problems and corruption with one sort of silver bullet. And that silver bullet is to increase biodiversity and ecological farming. Like how we farm in our country needs a makeover. And so what I'm going to advocate, or what I'm advocating, is that we begin to retrain our farmers on how to create biodiversity and natural corridors for insects that eat other insects and insects that help pollinize plants. And there are actually plants that you can grow that will attract harmful insects, and they'll eat the plants that are not cash crops. So in other words, creating a knowledge base amongst my farmers to grow certain things that can help protect their cash crops and train them in how to not have standing water, thus breeding mosquitoes. So these are things where I'm starting to try to push a narrative of natural farming protection for my farmers. That's where I'm starting.
Okay, okay, that sounds pretty good. I see you've got plenty of good ideas in the terms of providing, some pretty big sustainable solutions here. That all seems great. What I'm thinking though is that that's going to cost a lot of money up front, and I feel that in the middle of this health crisis, money's probably not that great to go around. If we just start throwing money at you from international organizations, you've already mentioned the corruption problem. So how do we know that this isn't just going to go into the pockets of corrupt political leaders?
One of my first address to that is to use my diversity as a good thing. Whereas we have 370 different ethnic groups, they all have respect for their own tribal leader and have more respect for and will listen more closely to their tribal leader than some elected bureaucrat, elected senator or president who they may not know, who may not be part of their tribe or their history. So I plan as the leader of this government to call a summit where I invite the leaders of the 370 different ethnic groups to come forth to meet with experts in the field of biodiversity and farming. I'm going to bring them together. They're going to get a book called How to Manage Insects on Your Farm, a guide to ecological strategies. They're going to hear from experts, and we're going to spend whatever it takes, 3 to 5 days with these leaders so that they feel confident in managing and spreading this message to their people. So in some ways, what we're doing is just devolving federalism. We're just taking, instead of being top down, we're going to devolve it out to the lowest level we can and allow those people to speak to their people, so they would have a better relationship with their people.
I like that. So you recognize that you have a problem with like leadership at the top. The people on the ground don't necessarily respect. So if you tried to make any like huge drastic change from like the top down, it's probably going to be moot. It won't matter. People won't pay attention. You're just another corrupt politician. But by bringing in local buy-in,
Yeah.
you've got a clearer, more legitimate local voice that's going to be able to kind of carry this message and probably get people to adhere to it and start to believe in it. We still have a problem with payment though. Like, where's this money going to come from?
So as the president leader, we are going to reach out to the IMF. We're going to reach out to the World Bank. We're going to reach out to the United Nations Farm Aid Division and try to acquire some loans to do this training, to do this targeted biodiversity that we're talking about. We're gonna. We feel like it will be easier to get loans for those things instead of trying to get loans for medical care, because medical care is more expensive. Trying to find vaccines, trying to find medicine to deal with the sicknesses that change constantly, that are constantly upgrading into different variants, can be expensive. It's a cheaper fix. It's a cheaper ask to go to the IMF, the UN, and ask for some money.
All right. So I see you got this big long-term policy. You're going to revamp your agricultural relationship with both the local, and this can expand into your more broader GDP. It seems more sustainable. It would be better for the health of your people and your community. But I feel that this isn't like a switch you can flip. In the short term, people are still getting sick. These variants around your community are still spreading. How do we keep your people, who are going to be the ones out in the fields working in agriculture, which is a huge part of your GDP, how do you keep them safe and coming into work and keeping them out working in the fields for your agriculture?
So a few years ago, that was a very successful campaign that we ran with the United Methodist Church and the NBA to help eliminate malaria. and it was called Nothing But Nets. Clever little pun with basketball nets and everything, and mosquito nets. And between those two organizations, sort of not just only footing the financial bill, but also buying these mosquito nets that we were able to put in our huts, in our people's huts and houses. Um, we lowered malaria, the incidences of malaria substantially, um, and it was a highly successful campaign. So, dealing with mosquitoes, dealing with variants, we sort of have a blueprint on what to do with that. And so, we're going to reach out to the NBA, we're going to reach out to the Methodist Church. We may, again, reach out to some other organizations to see if they want to get involved as well. But those will be the two primary organizations in the short term. And we can approach them and say, this is a short term deal, 6 months, a year, until we get over this hump with the learning how to farm it, a new way of farming.
Okay. Well, I think you got most of your bases covered. I think that's pretty good. Congratulations, Mr. Kirby. I think you may have passed.
Thank you. Whew, I was a little worried about that. Okay, so that would be the first thing, right? Now, there might be, for instance, when Klein just said, what's the short-term fix? For you guys, that may be the time where you say, give me a minute, right? Give me a minute. I'll go back to my table. I'll have to come up with a short-term fix, right? So there are certain avenues, there are certain times when Mr. Klein asks a question that if you need a minute, you say, we need a minute. And then you go take a minute. But, I mean, did anything he say seem threatening to you? It seemed like so like that's how it's going to be. Yeah, Cooper?
For the need a minute thing, if we do that, does that take off points?
Not at all. No, I want you to. I'd rather you take a minute and come up with something decent than.
How many minutes could this be? That's what I
Sounds like we get like an hour.
So, I mean, that has to be, just because we only have 2 hours, there has to be a kind of a limit on it. I would say, Mr. Klein can kind of chime in here too. I feel like you come for your initial talk, and then if you need to go take a minute, you get a chance to go take a minute. And a minute could be 10 minutes. Because I'll just hit the other groups, right? But at some point, if you keep coming up and you come up like 3 or 4 times and you say, I need a minute, that becomes problematic to your question, Cooper. That becomes like, okay, now you're just exploiting the system. Yes.
So just like the basics, like outline of it all, like presenting it. So will we just give like a short, like kind of summary of our country and how it works, and then like, do we do that first, and then you start asking us questions about our problem?
So like you notice, I didn't go into sort of the deeper detail that you guys could, for obvious reasons. But like, yes, when I started talking about the 370 ethnic groups, don't read the 370 ethnic groups, but just say, 40% are Christian, 40% are Muslim, 20% are tribal, right? We have a very young population. Our population pyramid is heavily tilted towards people under the age of 30.
And to jump onto that, you'll notice that he pointed out several features about his country that, I didn't realize at the time. He was just kind of doing some statistics and facts, but he emphasized these. And later on in his explanation, in his solution, he went back to the initial point of bringing up the various groups and the various ethnic groups and the tribal leaders and stuff like that. That's part of his solution. So that's why he made such a big emphasis. And that all comes back to kind of directing your message, directing your solution through building, I think we use the word frame, right? You're framing in the direction you want to go in. And you'll notice that he really led where I was going. He wasn't, if he brought up, the natural ecosystem approach of having in a different crops and stuff like that to sort of mitigate the mosquito problem, I'm not going to turn around and say, oh, well, what about all these new variants? Are you also, you know what I mean? I'm staying within his line of reasoning. And I think Mr. Kirby's going to do the exact same thing. We're not going to say, take your solution and go off in a completely different direction. We are going to follow your solution, down whatever rabbit hole you lead us.
So if for instance, you had this problem and you decided that instead of doing the farming part of it, you wanted to do the healthcare, and those were the statistics you led with about how hospitals and having a nurse shortage and blah 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 blah, and trying to find vaccines, then I'm not going to ask you about farming. I'm not going to be like, well, what are you going to do about the farms? What are you going to do about it? So to Mr. Klein's point, it's like very much you led. Your team is leading it. Other comments and or questions? These are good. Keep in mind this is going to be replayed for all the remaining 3 of my classes and all 3 of his classes. So yes.
Could you post it for us to just have?
I am, yes.
Okay.
By the end of this period, I'm going to post a link on Schoology that he can get and that you guys can see too.
Is the second question going to come like directly? So if we like pass the first test, the second question comes directly after that, or like after everybody's done?
No, your first question comes after you two present. So you're going to tell me about your country over by India and Southeast Asia, and you're going to tell me about all the stuff you're doing, and then I'm going to ask you a question, and you may be able to go like I did and go, and you may be able to, you guys in particular may be able to get like all through it and not need to take a minute. You may in our first interview. It's possible you guys have done a really good job, the 2 of you. Like, it's possible I could say, yeah, good job, you're good. Go read a book, right? So, I mean, it's not like preordained that you have to have 2 interviews with me.
Okay.
Yes.
So how's the exam gonna work? Like, is it like, are we all just gonna be in the room and
Yes.
wait our turn?
Right, exactly. So I'll just say, come on, you and me come up and let's talk about the task.
Okay.
And the rest of the people are just doing their thing. And we'll just sit over there and talk about them.
You're not like presenting to the class.
Yeah. Okay.
The other thing is we had talked about rolling a dice and you getting a secondary problem. We're scratching that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's been that component has been
There's
eliminated.
no secondary problem.
There's no secondary problem. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Is that the entirety of the test? You said there's like part 1. Is there a part 2 to this, or is that just
The part 2 to that is if your teacher says to you, I need a little bit more intel on this. I need a little bit more information about how you're going to pay for this. Like he kept asking about the money, right? If I didn't have at my fingertips how I was going to pay for it, then that would have to be a part 2 because I would have to go look up what the IMF does. I'd have to find out where I could get money from. But if I knew it and I was able to say it, and it's kind of like, good, got it, check.
you just pass?
Then you're done.
Yeah.
Like I was saying to Cooper, like it's done.
And another thing, like it's all very like feasible and realistic. I don't. You don't want anybody to come in and say like I'm having space lasers to blast all. I'm like that. You can't explain that, so that's not a viable answer. It was all very realistic and doable.
And the other thing that I said that I think needs to be taken note is when I talked about the summit coming together and giving each leader a book, that's an actual book. How to Manage Insects on Your Farm, a guide to ecological strategies. So I've been asking you to do this now, and I know Mr. Klein's asked his to do it as well. Over the last month, find details like that because that makes my story easier for Klein to take. He's like, oh, well, Kirby knows enough that that's this book here, right? And I'll be honest, I actually read some of this book. It was very interesting. I don't know much about farming, but I know more than I did before I read some of this book. And so those kinds of things make it much more likely that we will be satisfied, satiated, content with your situation if you dump in nuggets like that. Okay. Any other questions and or comments? Mr. Klein is here. We can try to answer them. You feel a little bit better about what it'll look like on exam week? Okay, good.
What about, you said we were gonna do like an interview by like,
Yeah.
I think like Thursday?
Okay, so yeah, that's a good question, Payne. So there is going to be a preliminary conversation that is about self-reflection in your group. And that's similar in that you and your group, your team member, come over to the teacher at the desk, and we have a rubric,
Yeah, so evaluation sheet.
that we will show you, and you just fill out the evaluation sheet. Like, if you want to talk about that, you wrote it.
Yeah, so it's like an evaluation sheet where you evaluate yourself, and then you evaluate your team, and you give weight, and you be honest, obviously, about how much you contributed to the overall success of the problem. Right. So that's really all it is. It's just
But it's 30% of your grade.
yeah.
So it's a 100-point exam. That part of the exam is 30%, and then the 70% is the interview.
This. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's stop the
I have
recording.
one more question.
Oh wait, hang on. Yeah.
On the thing you said, like 30 and 70%. So if you get a C on the this part, but you get an A on the like tiny
Evaluation.
reflection part, what would your final grade be?
I mean, we'd have to math, but
Yeah.
I mean, it would obviously help you, but
But isn't it only gonna be A, C, and F?
A, C, and F. Yes.
yeah.
So I mean, I think it would. I think, Van, it would depend on the score on the self-reflection, right? If it's 30 out of 30, the odds of you getting an A would increase. But some of that self-evaluation is also your partner. And I'm not saying this about you specifically, but if the partner says, "Well, yeah, I did 90% of the work, and Van did 10% of the work," well, that's going to have to be taken into account. And then we're going to be like, the day of the interview, if Van does all the talking and the other guy doesn't talk at all, then it's like, well, there's some things like that we would have to take into consideration the day of, that we can't necessarily foresee a week and a half out. Is that
That's
fair?
a good question. Yeah.
All right, cool.